Most of us operate on a simple, largely unquestioned default setting. We divide the world in two: good and bad, subject and object, me and everything else. This either-or logic is an excellent survival tool, but it creates persistent psychological friction. By drawing a boundary between the self and the other, or our inner mind and the outer world, we isolate ourselves. Reality becomes an object to be analyzed and managed from a distance, generating a quiet, underlying sense of alienation. When early Buddhist teachings arrived in China from India, they brought a massive, complex textual tradition. For centuries, practitioners sought to overcome human suffering through the intense intellectual study of these scriptures. Scholars spent lifetimes categorizing sutras and debating metaphysical concepts, trying to construct the perfect logical framework. They operated under the assumption that reading enough texts and organizing the ideas precisely would trigger a breakthrough. The founders of Chan, what would later be known in Japan as Zen, viewed this scholasticism as a trap. One can memorize every topographic line on a map without ever touching the dirt of the mountain. Similarly, analyzing the logic of suffering is distinct from walking the path out of it. Chan Buddhism formalized a radical rejection of this scholastic approach. They argued that authentic awakening is a special transmission outside the scriptures, completely independent of words or letters. To a Zen practitioner, theoretical knowledge constitutes a language game. Words are abstract symbols that represent reality, but they are not the reality they name. The moment an experience is categorized, a conceptual filter drops between the person and the actual event. Because the intellect relies entirely on abstract symbols and binary distinctions, it is structurally unable to grasp the unbroken whole of reality. Reading and reasoning describe the water while leaving the reader entirely dry. To bypass this intellectual filter, the Zen tradition developed the Koan, a highly engineered psychological weapon. A master gives a student a prompt, like the famous "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" and demands a rational answer. The student's ego consciousness immediately attempts to solve it using its default either-or logic. The koan is structurally unsolvable by conceptual thought. As the master repeatedly denies every logical answer presented, the practitioner's inability to find intellectual resolution creates immense psychological tension. This process can go on for years, driving the rational mind to its absolute limit. Finally, exhausted by the impossible task, the intellect gives up. The logical framework collapses, and the ego consciousness drops away. The koan exposes the fragility of human reason. Breaking the mind's reliance on analysis clears the way for a direct, unmediated engagement with the world. This collapse of the intellect is anchored in the rigorous physical practice of zazen, or seated meditation. In the Soto Zen tradition, the physical act of just sitting is the realization itself. It sidesteps the concept of meditation as a stepping stone toward a future goal, focusing instead on immediate presence. There is a precise physiological mechanism at work. By focusing intensely on deep abdominal breathing, the practitioner shifts control away from the conscious, voluntary brain and stimulates the autonomic nervous system. Ordinarily, our breathing patterns are tied to shifting emotions. The immobile posture and slow, rhythmic breath of zazen starves the ego consciousness of the turbulence it needs to project its desires onto the world. This intense grounding yields a state called mushin, or no mind, where the ego-driven discriminatory activity of the mind simply ceases. By bypassing the intellect through physical discipline, the practitioner neutralizes the mind's ability to overlay its biases and conceptual labels onto reality. This complete collapse of the human intellect anchors the practitioner violently and sharply in the immediate physical world. Zen masters compare this state to a clear, transparent mirror. The mirror reflects exactly what sits before it, omitting judgment and refusing to cling to the image once the object is removed. This non-discriminatory awareness collapses the gap between the observer and the observed. The separate self looking out at an other vanishes, leaving only the act of seeing. This is tathata, or suchness. It is the realization that a thing is simply exhibiting its primordial mode of being. A rock exists exactly as it is, stripped of symbolic meaning and human metaphor. Ultimate truth is the raw, unfiltered reality sitting directly in front of your eyes. It exists without the baggage of your own thoughts or the need for intellectual deciphering. Even after this non-dualistic realization, the practitioner must eventually rise and return to the dualistic, everyday human life world. A famous Zen maxim maps this journey. Before practice, mountains are mountains. During practice, mountains are not mountains. After realization, mountains are truly mountains again. The practitioner returns to the mundane, making tea, sweeping floors, and engaging with society, while remaining free from enslavement to the logical mind. They act with fluid spontaneity, moving through the world effectively without ego-driven motives. True awakening is the death of the intellect's desperate need to solve existence. Life, once freed from being a puzzle to figure out, becomes a reality to simply live.